Hello, everyone, and this is another special edition of Sports Talk with Tonsoni. I'm your host, Brian Tonsoni, and today I have a very special guest, Eli Boettger from Mountain West Wire, part of USA Today Sports, and also a member of the United States Basketball Writers Association, and from out west. So, Eli, welcome to this special edition.
Thank you so much for having me on, Brian. Really appreciate it.
And what we have been doing is we've been interviewing some of the best journalists across the country and getting their opinions on what makes a good sports journalist to help our young writers in our brand new endeavor at Delphi, sportstalkwithtonsoni.com. So, Eli, the first question I'm going to ask you this evening is, if you were to advise brand new sports writers, what do you think is maybe the most important thing as they approach writing their stories?
I think just finding your passion and finding what you like to write about is so important. It's the main reason why I even began writing to begin with, is I just wanted an outlet where I could write about college basketball in any form. And once I was able to do that, I think that's where I started to find some traction. So just experiment with different things, find out what you like, what you don't like, and finding out what you don't like is just as important as finding out what works for you. So finding your passion and just honing in on what you're able to do, I think, is the most important thing.
When you're getting ready to write a story and inside of basketball, do you pick stories that you're interested in writing, or that you believe your readers would be interested in writing, or is that a combination?
It's definitely a combination. I pitch some stories when I do my freelance work, and in large part that is what I'm interested in, but also what I think our audience and also my employers think that they'll be interested in as well. But if I'm being creative, I can kind of go off my own path and just try to do things that I like to do. Much of my writing is based off statistics and numbers, so I spend more time looking at sports references or pages like that, messing around with spreadsheets, than I do actually writing the articles, because I just want to find data and things that I'll find interesting that maybe someone hasn't seen before, and then I can write a story about that.
How much in your research, in looking at those references, a ratio or a time period of research to writing do you do for your stories?
Well, I guess it definitely differs. The writing that I do for Mountain West Wire, I would say, is mostly written portion, but I also contribute to Athletic Director University, which is far more data and research-driven articles. So I would say for that site, it's probably 90% data research and 10% writing.
And so as you're doing your research for that site, or even articles that won't require as much research, share with our students the importance of accuracy and knowing your topics. And then even when you cite sources and maybe even get quotes from people in your story, the accuracy and the importance of accuracy in your writing and in the readers as they look at your work.
Well, I think accuracy is imperative to everything that this industry is built on, because you can build up trust with someone for 2-3 years, and if you make a mistake or share something that shouldn't be shared, that breaks trust, and then you just don't have that connection anymore. So accuracy is definitely important, especially when it comes to reporting. I guess the number one thing for me that comes to mind is that when you're speaking with sources, like I talk to a lot of head coaches and assistant coaches, is knowing that you can have a conversation with someone without something having to be shared. And that's not, I wish I would have learned that earlier, because it's nice to know that you can just message a coach and just have a conversation with them without knowing that something from that conversation needs to be shared or posted to the public. So also making sure that you source everyone. If you have information that someone else shared before you, always checking to make sure that you source them correctly. You won't run into any issues like that, because once you start having problems with not correctly sourcing someone or sharing something that might be untrue or shouldn't be shared, that's when your legacy starts to be tarnished a little bit. And so I try to remain as careful as I possibly can be when it comes to sharing some of that confidential information.
So those casual conversations or off the record conversations, those have to help in understanding the story or the team or what's going on, even though you're not. That's got to just be like a part of a research too, to understand that. And those things don't have to be quoted in every article. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah, I would say that I would say probably the bulk of the conversations I have with sources, none of that gets published, and it's enjoyable that way, because that's how you really build up your community or your network. I suppose is you just start to build relationships with these people, and you get to know them, and once you're able to have a conversation, then maybe they feel more comfortable with you. But when I receive a follow on Twitter or meet someone that I think is important to the longevity of my career, I always like to introduce myself and exchange contact information. And I always tell them, if there's anything that you need, feel free to reach out for me. And so that's kind of the building block for a relationship that's definitely professional. It can also be casual as well.
You know, I spent some time as a head coach in the state of Indiana for 10 years and had local reporters. And there are a lot of casual conversations at practice sessions or media sessions or post game. And as a coach, sometimes you just need to have that conversation to kind of get out kind of what you're seeing, or to give the reporter a feel. And it's nice to know that the reporter is trustworthy enough not to see that stuff end up in an article the next day. And so that really hit home when you mentioned that. Yeah. So it's time for a story. How do you go about setting up a story so that it flows from start to finish, and that reader will go from the very first word to the end? Do you have a style, or does it vary on topics? But how do you go about setting that up?
It certainly varies based on what I'm trying to do. So I have your standard recaps or previews, and then you have the news type articles, columns, and also the data articles that I mentioned previously. I'd say for news articles, I just hop right in. That's pretty standard. You just start with the first sentence of what's happening. So maybe a player from Boise State has torn his ACL. So just say Boise State forward, so such and such has torn his ACL according to whoever it might be. Or if I reported the story, then we'll say like according to Mountain West Wire, or sources tell Mountain West Wire. But when it comes to columns, that's when you can really get creative. And I like to hook the reader just as quickly as I can, maybe with just a subtle sentence or so right at the start, maybe something that isn't entirely clear or maybe a bit cryptic, so the reader isn't entirely sure what's going on, and then just dive right into it. But the bulk of my writing, I really like to include statistics or charts or tables with what I do. So if I can include that or introduce what I'm trying to write about and include a chart or a table somewhere in the middle, I think that's hones into my style a bit more. But like you said, it varies quite a bit based on what you're trying to do.
Some people might think that a story absolutely needs quotes. How do you feel about the use of quotes? Are they necessary a lot, or is it, again, dependent on what you're trying to get across?
I don't think that every story needs a quote. I think that something that looks quite odd is when you have a quote just inserted when it has very little to do with what you're writing about. Then it just looks like you're trying to force feed some additional information that might not be necessary. So a lot of the writing that I have probably doesn't have quotes, but when I think that it's necessary, it's nice to sprinkle something in that adds a little bit more to the article.
What's the difference for our guys? What would be the difference between a feature or a column and then say like game day reporting where you have press pass credentials and have a deadline? What's the difference? And is there one that you enjoy more than another?
I don't really say that I can enjoy one more than the other. Sometimes I have a column or something that I feel really passionate about, and I feel that I can write quite a bit or something poignant on. I like to hop into those. But going back to the difference between the two, a column or a feature probably takes a lot more research, I think, especially with a featured article. There was one that I wrote this past winter about Chandler Hutcherson from Boise State, and I had to do research and speak with other sources and his old high school coach, and so a lot of time and research went into that. So those stories take a bit longer, and then your game day type stuff, that should be almost automatic, and that's something that I've struggled with, I would say, to get these articles published within a timely manner, because as a lot of writers joke about, they have deadlines that they have to meet before and after the game. So you have to be really concise and know what you're talking about in a short amount of time. So that's more speed writing, and column and features, I think you can take a bit more time to really put across what you're trying to say.
In your informal or formal discussions with sources, either, you're going to just get some background for yourself, or you're going to use something in one of your stories, what constitutes a good question, and what should our young reporters avoid when they're questioning people that they need information from?
I try to put myself in the shoes of the coach as much as I can. And what I mean by that is, if I'm a head coach or assistant coach and there's someone that's always pining me for questions, asking about this or asking about that, and every conversation is trying to lead to a story, that would definitely, it wouldn't make me feel so great about that connection. So developing a sense of comfort with the source, I think, is very important. But as for a good question, it's tough to say. It depends on the situation, I think, but making sure that you know all the background information about what's being talked about, because nothing looks much worse when you ask a question about something that's already public information or a story that's already moved on. So just asking questions that are suitable and you think that the coach or the source feels comfortable with sharing.
Do you feel that there's different ways to write for digital stories as opposed to print stories? And do you have many stories that are both? We're going to be mostly digital. Is there a word count or something, as I'm thinking, to try to help my students with people who might be reading these things on a laptop or a phone? Has that made a difference in your writing, the digital platforms?
Not really. To be completely honest, I'm still relatively new to sports journalism as a whole. I've only been in the industry about 3-4 years, so the bulk of my writing has been through digital, but I do have some things coming out on print this fall, and so that's far more word count oriented, because you need to have, or the editors have, a certain amount of space that they can provide. So finding the right amount of words to put your message across is very important for that. So as for right now, I would say the difference probably isn't all that big at this point, but if you have a word count you need to meet, or certain formats you need to follow, that's definitely something to keep an eye out.
We live in a world where digital access, a 51-year-old teacher can start a sports website, all right? And so that's fascinating to me too, when you have big media outlets, ESPN, CBS Sports, so forth, that have major productions. I've talked to several people who have gotten started. One gentleman who's been in with 2 years in some what I call blogging sites, or not in traditional sites. Do you see that continuing to grow, or is that something that's in a certain 5-10 year pattern?
I definitely think it's going to be something that will grow, and I think that we're starting to see. I think it was just a New York Daily News just this past week how many people that they had to release from their duties. It's just the continuation of the print industry just suffering all these losses. But I think there is some good that's coming out of it. I think a lot of talented writers are finding a way to be successful in the digital media industry, and things like blogging or podcasts, I think, are really going to take off. And we've seen most of the writers that we're familiar with, and the ones that are household names right now, they either have a podcast or they have their own blog or a digital outlet that they're writing on right now. So I think no matter what sports fans will always want to read or listen about their favorite teams and favorite players. And if that outlet is now blogging or through podcasts, can you hear me?
Yeah, that we got disconnected either on my end or your end or something like that.
Okay.
So to my listeners, we were talking with Eli Boettger about some journalism things, and we're just about at our point. we're down to a question or two. Eli, what's the biggest mistake that young sports writers make, and they should be trying to be on the lookout to try to avoid?
I think going back to accuracy and honesty with the content you produce is huge. If you publish something that isn't true or shouldn't be shared, that immediately cuts off a number of sources that are at your disposal, and things get around really quickly. I've noticed that some of the sources that I've made, they've reached out to other people and have made a connection through me. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on that the writer, him or herself, isn't familiar with. And then on a smaller scale, that's something that I think has been huge for me. And it's just one of the fundamentals of writing is just getting your grammar and your sentence structure down. And that sounds very minimal. It sounds something that isn't all that important, but I think it's imperative to good writing. If you have a mistake in a headline, that deters people from reading your article, or they might poke fun at it that you made a mistake. And that's the exact opposite of what you want the reader to think about your writing.
You know, you mentioned a couple things. I noticed I had the word preview when I had review in one of our students' titles, and hurried up and went back and changed that. And, the slight mistakes I think are going to happen, especially when we have high school and college age people writing for us. And I'm a new writer as well, but you do want to avoid those major mistakes of grammar and use people, I think. So who was your main, and we'll probably wrap it up here after this question, but who is your main influence on writing, and who do you turn to for advice?
I would say that I probably have a few main influences on my writing. Gary Parrish is definitely one of the first ones that comes to mind. He's just an excellent college basketball reporter and writer. If your students are interested in someone who is good at writing columns, I would say definitely check out what Gary Parrish has done. His columns are tremendous. And there are also some other names. Jeff Eisenberg does a really good job. Nicole Auerbach. I guess more in the conference that I cover, Jeff Grammer does an excellent job reporting. As for the people that I look to for help, I was really fortunate to reach out to Jeremy Moss, who is my manager over on Mountain West Wire. He was pretty much the one guy that gave me a chance to start blogging back in, it must have been 2015. And he's been so helpful with both the reporting and writing end. And we were able to cover the Mountain West tournament over in Las Vegas this past spring. And he's always been able to answer the calls and my questions when I need it. So I think it's just so important to reach out to as many people as possible and just start developing those connections, because there are so many people that want to help out and just make the sports writing industry as great as it possibly can be.
You know, Eli, I've been amazed at, I sent the tweet out a week ago, and I'm up to 14 interviews. I have 8 scheduled. You're the 5th, and your last comment there, the sports journalists have been fantastic reaching out. And last, and I hope I got you wrote that book on bracketology, correct?
Yes, I did.
What's the name? I don't have it on the tip of my head right now. I should have done research and written this down. Can you go over the name of that book?
Yes, it's called Bracketology: Science Behind the NCAA Tournament Selection Process.
And I just want to say a thank you. And most of the students that'll be listening who write for me for Sports Talk with Tonsoni are Delphi Bracketology members, and I suggest the book. And I've read the book, and it was really well done. and that's a neat field that I have found in the last 4 or 5 years, and us fellow bracketologists. So on behalf of Delphi Bracketology, we say thank you for writing the book, and also thank you for the reference, shout out, whatever the right term is, that you gave us as well in the book. That's very much appreciated.
I appreciate that as well. I think what you guys are doing with the bracketology and this writing now is just so cool. And I remember watching the video on CBS Sports, I believe it was this past year or 2 years ago, with when you guys won the Delphi Bracketology tournament, and seeing all the high school kids that have just done an excellent job. And it's just really impressive what you've been able to do to empower these young people and do some excellent things. So I thank you as well.
Well, we'll definitely stay in touch as the basketball season comes out, because us in the Midwest, we need to have a little more knowledge of the Mountain West and the teams out west. So I'll be looking at you for some expertise. But thank you again for sharing with me, someone we haven't met personally. You haven't met our students, and you're taking time on a Thursday afternoon to help us. That is very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate it.
This has been another special edition of Sports Talk with Tonsoni. Thanks for listening.